Thank you so much. Yes, my name is Linas Tavaras. I'm coming from Lithuania, Vilnius University. And I would like to begin with also my story a little bit during my presentation, because it might give you more context about the ideas which I will present, where they're coming from. Now, I would say I'm in the very beginning of my PhD project, which is mainly about psychedelic movements, psychedelic cultures in Lithuania, but also a little bit more broadly in East Central Europe. And also in the very, very beginning, I want to do a shout out to NGO, harm reduction NGO Young Wave, in which I'm volunteering for maybe the last 8 years, and this is where I got a great deal of knowledge about the psychedelics, especially from the harm reduction perspective. So we can talk about this maybe after the presentation. But yeah, now I will begin my presentation with my background a little bit. I will move to ethics, a couple of ethical reflections, especially touching the topic of this conference. Also, the field work. I will give you a couple of perspectives to the phenomena that I'm currently studying. And finally, theory. I'm planning to share with you a couple of theoretical frameworks that hopefully will wrap everything together, what I'm going to talk about. Right. So, but let's start from the beginning. So, my background is in South Asian studies, and while studying in India, I was researching the opium fields, the legal opium farmers in the various villages of Madhya Pradesh. And firstly, I focused on various technicalities about the legal markets, illegal markets, laws, etc. But what surprised me the most was how farmers spoke about the relationship to the poppy plant. And they told the stories of praying to goddess Kali, whose skin, they said, resembled the color of opium. And so they used to pray to Mother Kali to get a better harvest of poppy. And stories like this really showed me a very specific culture and structure of meanings that is shaping around people and psychoactive substances. Then during the masters, I went to Nepal, and here I observed very similar attachment around cannabis and Lord Shiva. In Nepal, cannabis are criminalized, but still widely celebrated, intertwined with both pop culture and local spirituality. In Kathmandu and other cities, you can find various posters, images of deities with hippie aesthetics showing how subcultures continuously reshape the meaning around psychoactive plants. And these early encounters taught me that psychoactive substances are never just chemicals. Of course, they are surrounded by cultural narratives, rituals, and deep symbolic ties, and sometimes even offering various spiritual meanings to the people too. And my focus gradually shifted from South Asia to Eastern Europe when the full-scale invasion broke out. And through solidarity initiatives, I came into contact with Ukrainian Psychedelic Research Association, also known as UPRA. And UPRA was even covered in a news article in Lithuania as an organization that quickly started both research and psychedelic-assisted therapy and psychedelic-assisted retreats. And their work caught my attention and in one way even shaped my PhD project. I was looking at how psychedelic movements emerge in regions marked by trauma, post-Soviet transitions, and now war. And some Lithuanians, including me, got a lot of inspiration of what UPRA is doing now. And now I want to describe a little bit of a situation of what is happening in Lithuanian psychedelic scene. So, surprise, surprise, the psychedelics are completely banned, and the topic, that any kind of a talk about them, it's highly taboo, as in most of the places in the region. And conducting such research requires some things to be set on ethical part. Obviously, we must be critical about all this psychedelic renaissance that is happening right now. And it is important to mention that Baltics, although having some historical ethnobotanical records of some psychedelic plants being used in the country, but nowadays most of the psychedelic substances and culture surrounding them are being brought from the outside. And these psychedelic cultures are increasingly being shaped by psychedelic tourism, the one that already some of the earlier speakers spoke about. This is the practice of traveling abroad to various countries, especially in South America, and for various ayahuasca, psilocybin retreats. And in this case, Lithuanians, as many other Westerners, they come back to Lithuania having this sort of a knowledge, and they start to becoming, gurus themselves and try to, apply their own knowledge. And scholars have criticized this phenomenon as a form of psychedelic colonialism, where indigenous traditions are being commodified, decontextualized, and consumed by the global north. And more than that, there is a quite big enthusiasm that I notice, especially among the young people, who take these mainstream narratives. They sometimes cherry pick of whatever Joe Rogan says or RFK Jr. says, and I noticed this precisely situation, that a lot of young people, they think that psychedelics could heal more or less anything, and they take them into their hands and do whatever they want. Due to time limitation, I will not go into the whole cultural appropriation topic, but I would like to quickly mention one interesting example, and it's really fascinating that even Professor Hauskeller mentioned very same article provided by Yuri Seligman. It was published in 2022. And I will not go further because it was already spoken about, but it's could be maybe an example of a constructive dialogue between the representatives of various indigenous groups who practice psychedelic rituals and global north. Now, let's come back to the Baltics. While being in Lithuania, where I currently study, I came to know about a local psychedelic community called Psykonautai. And I would call it psychedelic semi-underground community, since they do have public events, they do have a quite active social media accounts, they are pretty open, but still they have this part of closeness, creating a safe space for various members who often have various psychedelic experiences and wants to share them with others safely. Psykonautai describes its activity precisely as modern shamanism, and phrase can be found in their official website. So this is how they portray themselves. And they do organize discussions, educational activities, integrational circles that borrow from both Baltic folk traditions, but also from the global cultures worldwide. And furthermore, the festivals, they take various collaborations with Psychonaut community, and festivals like Yaga Gathering, Gaia Gathering, Amber Burn in Lithuania, I think even maybe Shamanistan and Terra in Latvia, not to mention whole Polish scene, they create ritualized spaces where music, art, and psychedelics converge into spiritual frameworks. And these festivals not only draw on a global countercultural currents, but also incorporate local folklore, neo-pagan symbols, and practices. Now, this part I would like to elaborate a little bit more. Communities like Psykonautai and festival organizers offer new narratives to psychedelics, or maybe I should even say psychedelia in general. They see it not only as a substances, but as a transcendental mind alteration through art, practices like, for example, psychedelic singing. Now, this is a very interesting part. Just last year, I came to a local Psychonaut community event, which was called Psychedelinės sutartinės. And it basically means psychedelic. Sutartinės is traditional Lithuanian polyphonic singing. And by the local psychonaut community, these pre-Christian Baltic ritual singing sessions were interpreted through discussion compared to psychedelic experience, the one that can get from the psychedelic substance. And it was pretty interesting discussion since the professional singers were invited and also the members of psychonaut community. So it was quite wholesome event. And this is the part where my presentation will become a little bit more theoretical. But I hope, is everything all right? Okay. I hope it will be fruitful for us to discuss various scholars and their proposed ideas on the topic. More or less, they're merging together in some ways. So first of all, while traveling through various communities and festivals, I was curious about the discussion about the psychedelics and spiritualism. And some may say it is a type of new age. And here we might draw on a comparative perspective with the work of François Gautier, Analysis of Burning Man, a form of spirituality or even a non-explicitly religious event. Gautier argues that Burning Man functions as a form of ritualized spirituality, where art, community, and altered states of consciousness create this lived experience of sacred without reliance on institutional religion. And the festival is not only about entertainment. It generates shared myths and rituals, and this is highly relevant when we talk about Baltic festivals, like I mentioned, Yaga, or even Burning Man equivalent Amberburn. And these examples shows how psychedelia can operate as a cultural catalyst for different forms of spirituality. Another concept is socio-psychedelic imaginaries I use in my work. It was developed by social scientist Claudia Schwartz-Plagg, also in 2022. And these imaginaries refer to collectively held visions, expectations, and symbolic frameworks through which societies imagine the role of psychedelics in the future. These imaginaries are not just passive reflections of reality, but rather active imaginative forces that shape how societies organize healing, identity, and transformation. And in this sense, Lithuania, more broadly Baltic and East Central European countries are not merely catching up with the West psychedelic renaissance, which they do at some level, but they are also generating their own imaginaries rooted in the local cosmologies, post-Soviet cultural memory, and neo-pagan influences. Then, to interpret these developments, I also draw on Wouter's Hanegraaff's notion of entheogenic esotericism. According to him, contemporary psychedelic users are often engaged in a personalized, non-institutional form of spirituality that combines mystical insight, individual healing, and gnosis. And this is particularly relevant when we talk about post-Soviet spaces, where traditional religious authority has eroded due to decades-long persecution, but still there is this spiritual longing, or we can call it maybe ontological lack, a crave for spiritual practice. And psychedelics or entheogens in this context become tools for constructing alternative metaphysical worlds that are no longer grounded in doctrine, but rather in experience. And so far, conducting my research, I've encountered an aspect of what I call in-between legality and in-between rationality. Now, I will not elaborate much about the legal part, since it's illegal, most of that, but probably only the Ukraine is becoming the first precedent in post-Soviet space, which might regulate psychedelics in a couple of years and maybe faster, hopefully. But on the rational side, although neuroscience can explain much of what psychedelics do to the brain, not everything, but the experience itself often exceeds rational explanation, like visions of deities, existential unity, multiple realities, etc. And such experiences may be called even transrational, not necessarily objectively logical, but having an internal order or meaning for the experiencing person. And in some fields of research, we may have some parallels to studies on dreams, myths, and visions. Now, I talked right now already a lot about various concepts, spirituality, meaning making. Now, how can we all connect that? Where all this leads us? And in my opinion, this leads us beyond all the binaries, beyond the modern rationalism, which tends to reduce everything and to basically rigid mechanisms, and beyond postmodernism or postmodern skepticism, which often dismisses meaning as merely relative and or constructed. And here I would like to introduce one last figure, a historian and a philosopher, Jason Ananda Storm, and his concept of metamodernist perspective. In simple terms, metamodernism does not mean going back to pre-modern belief in myths or rituals, nor does it mean staying in a purely skeptical deconstructive mode. Instead, it calls for a critical re-engagement with symbolic life, with myth, ritual, and enchantment, while still remaining reflexive and self-aware. In other words, can we make a really fruitful and productive dialogue, taking the best parts of modernism and postmodernism, and maybe even go even further? Now, I haven't answered this question myself. I hope to do it in a couple of years, but this is really an open question. And I find it especially relevant for psychedelic studies, especially the anthropology in psychedelics. In the communities I study, I see precisely this blending. Psychonauts simultaneously includes neuroscience and neo-paganism contexts, trauma therapy and with folk cosmology, or clinical integrational circles alongside Baltic ritual singing. And it is not naive to return to tradition, nor is it pure secular rationality. It is something in between, a conscious co-creation of science, spirituality, and culture. Now, to conclude, psychedelics in the Baltics and Eastern Europe reveal a fascinating in-between space, a set of gray zones between legality and illegality, between scientific skepticism and spirituality. And what I see emerging here is not simply a copy of Western psychedelic renaissance, but locally rooted imaginaries shaped by neo-pagan tradition, post-Soviet histories, and of course global countercultural flows. For the anthropology, this opens important questions. How do communities construct meaning through altered states of consciousness? And how are myths and rituals are being reinvented in contemporary contexts? So psychedelics basically challenge us to look beyond the binary of rational versus irrational, and instead to take seriously the symbolic, experimental, and mythic dimensions of human life. Thank you.
Now, plenty of time for questions and comments. There we have. And next, Ayla.
This is a trick question because I'm going to throw your question back to you. How do we create meaning? Language is one way, and if I understood right, you speak Lithuanian as your mother tongue, and that's incredibly rich language. Now, you probably use the word psychedelic in Lithuanian language, but if you can't use that word, what word would you use in Lithuanian, and tell us what it means?
Wow, I haven't expected such a question. That's a good one. Well, in fact, I had one conversation with a local ethnologist, and she proposed Lithuanian word sieloraiška, which means basically more or less the same. When we talk about psychedelics, soul manifesting or mind manifesting. So this is basically equivalent to, in Lithuanian language, it's not really used. It was just like an experiment. But I noticed that some people, they tend to take certain substances, like for example mushrooms, and they just call various psychedelics like mushroom or shroom. We also have grybas, and it becomes like a little bit divine of substance, like they sort of introduce others to this shroom and talk to him and so on. So there is a little bit of that, but that's a good question. Yeah, I should go more into this ethnology. Yeah.
What was it? Say it again.
Sieloraiška.
Ayla and then Christine.
Thank you for a fascinating presentation. Very interesting to hear that in Lithuania, in psychedelic underground, a mixture of like international psychedelic culture and local traditions. So I would like to ask you if you think that there are like some kind of nationalism or other political meaning making in these subcultures.
Well, about the political part, so far I did quite a few informal interviews with various members of Psychonauti, this community. And this is a rapidly growing community, and I noticed a couple of quite influential, quite important figures in that community. And so far, I would say they are probably waiting for a window of opportunities. You know, from time to time, there is a discussion in the parliament level about, you know, possible regulation of psychedelics and so on. Right now, just recently, we had ketamine therapy legalized in Lithuania. So they are sort of gathering, you know, together. And probably when that window of opportunity will come, they will just try to put as much work as possible, you know, to make regulation as, you know, convenient, you know, or more, I guess, science-based as possible, because there's a lot of bright people, a lot of, you know, people from various backgrounds, including science, politics, you know, even mainstream media figures. So I think in a couple of years we might see something on a political level, especially if there will be a precedent of post-Soviet country regulating psychedelics, as for example Ukraine might be one soon. So yeah.
Thank you for your talk. I would like to ask you about so these Druidish, pagan, etc. practices are also quite underground in the UK. Very small, marginalized communities, but not invisible. And there is a reviving, an intentional one of a relationship to nature, similar to colleagues I have who go to Iquitos to diet, say, on a tree or something, yeah? So there is some similarity that is outside, that doesn't necessarily have to be psychedelic. So I know that in the British discussion about Druids, there is a big debate whether psychedelics and psychedelic practices have anything to do with Druidry or not. But it is clearly, for many people in the UK, there is a sort of internal colonization, and that is resisting that. It is resisting a certain modern take on the colonial Great Britain to actually have these Druid and pagan, neo-pagan communities, witches, and who work with Amanita muscaria, etc. It's a feminist idea as well linked to this. So there is a subversive intention that doesn't necessarily have to be psychedelic at all, but it has a great mythological and critical or revolutionary idea or drive behind it for people to do this in rituals and practices. Did you find something similar, and can you tell us more about it if there's time?
Yeah, the Druids are absolutely fascinating. I was a little bit curious about various pagan, but I would say neo-pagan traditions right now that are emerging in Europe, I think, more or less, well, more than previously. And in Lithuania, we have this situation that Lithuanian usually takes pride in pagan traditions because Lithuanians were Christianized last in Europe, I think in 16th century or so on. So we still have these sort of traditions that are still more or less alive. They were Christianized, but they are alive. And the thing is that in past decade, neo-pagan movement became very large in Lithuania. And even recently, after 10 years of a struggle, it was legitimized by the parliament as a religious community, and it was, you know, a great goal for them. But the thing is that we don't have, as well as Druids, I believe, in UK, we don't have any literature left from the pagan times. So everything that is happening right now is a reinterpretation of what might it be, what it might was. So there's plenty of space to put your own interpretations, and it's very soft phenomena. So everybody wants to put a little bit of himself, of his interests into this, and this is probably the psychonautae as well. They took and tried to see whether there could be some kind of a relation to psychedelia, although it may not be, but they're just pretty comfortable with this open thought of what it be, maybe. But speaking more concretely, I think Amanita muscaria probably is the only one that was, there is some details about the usage of Amanita muscaria, and it was banned just this year on January 1st, interestingly. Yeah, and we do have a couple of other, usually mushrooms, as well as datura, lucky caps as well that were used, but not necessarily in a pagan background. So yeah.
Based on my timekeeping, we have time for a short, and I will present that selfishly. It's related to what George's presentation and your presentation when you were talking about this, like synthesizing local and global forms of culture, like the changing culture as an evolving system. And you were talking about like appropriation or like this, like the moral problem in this. And I start wondering if there is a risk of like walking on eggshells, which like might hinder like cultural development, because culture is by nature like very changing. But what are your thoughts on this?
So the question is whether the critical lens hinders. Whether an overly critical lens hinders cultural development.
Or the fear of culturally appropriating.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. What I like to think of when I think of that question is thinking about collaboration as an alternative to appropriation, and I think because I don't think, I think, like you said, culture needs to develop, and certain practices come from certain places, and they travel, and other people will start working with it. But I think it's more about how we do that, and whether there can be practices of reciprocity and respect towards the traditions that they come from. I think appropriation is a very specific type of cultural production which does not respect what it comes from. It just claims traditions as its own. So I do think that I am very critical of appropriation, but I do think there are definitely alternatives to keep culture moving forward that can be respectful, if that answers the question.
Yeah, I would not add up much to that. I would agree. Just, various phenomena, there's this constant flow, around the globe of various phenomena, becoming each other cultures, each culture over the time starts to own various phenomena, and I believe right now it's happening with psychedelics. They're taking, and this will be over the time more or less like the Lithuanians, for example, will take the cultures of Iboga, LSD, and so on, although it's not completely natural. But I guess only the scholars and various maybe influential people can help to calibrate this process, which is already happening. So we can maybe try to have a fruitful dialogue, because it will happen. this colonialism. At least what I see right now, it's not much, it will happen, and it's up to us whether it will happen in the conversation with other cultures. So yeah, that would be it.
Thank you so much, Linas.
Thank you.